Okay, cool. So topic today is actually pretty straightforward, but there's a few details about how you can use two-factor authentication that makes it so the different methods are not equal. Some of them are actually much weaker than others, but because any two-factor is so much better than no two-factor at all, for many years, we just figured, enable two-factor, that's a really good step. But now we're getting at the point where that's not enough. So in this Lunch and Learn, we're going to talk about the different two-factor methods. We're going to talk about what we're doing at Fleet and what you can do to switch the different methods you're using, or to make it safer when you don't have the option. So the different methods that are available, and this is a screenshot from our handbook in the Google two-step verification section. So in this presentation, you'll see 2FA used most of the time for two-factor authentication. Some people use MFA for multi-factor authentication. Google decided to call it two-step verification because, when you've got too many standards, you should just invent a third one, I guess, right? So when you start without 2FA, right, you've got a username and a password, and everyone knows this is not safe anymore. And the main reason why is because of phishing, right? Or websites are getting hacked and people reuse passwords. I see a lot of things going around on the internet, right? Like on Twitter in the last few weeks, there's this chart. I won't even show it because I think it's scientifically accurate. It's BS. If your password is not 25 character long, it would take, a gaming laptop only 17 minutes to crack and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of asterisks to that, but in the end, it doesn't even matter, right? Like even if your password was super hard to crack or uncrackable, it won't make a difference if you get phished, right? And if you think phishing is not going to happen to you, it's because you've never seen a phishing attempt that was well targeted enough towards you, because anyone can fall for phishing. So that's why I don't even want to get into the, your password should be longer. Complexity of the passwords, whatever, I don't really mind. Just make them longer and don't reuse them. That being said, if you only have a password, someone's going to break into your account at one point or another if you are targeted, right? Like you could be lucky and you're just never targeted. That happens to a lot of people. If you don't want to rely on luck, you'll need two-factor authentication. Then we've got all the phone-based stuff, right? So SMS or voice, right? So voice is typically there for people who don't have a mobile number attached to an account, right? But it's the same thing, right? Either I'll send you a text message saying, your password, your code for logging in is 123456, or an automated system is going to call you. I find that very annoying, but it's also unsafe. And I find that annoying because sometimes I try to log into a site that only supports that. I don't get the code. It's been like 30 seconds. I still don't have the code. I get angry. I click send another code. I get a code, but it's the first one and it's expired, and it just makes me hate computers. So I feel like if something is going to make me so angry, it should at least be very secure, and it's not. And so we'll talk about why. Then we've got the time-based one-time password. So TOTP is the acronym for that. So think Google Authenticator style, right? Like you've got an app that's going to give you a 6-digit code. That's also phishable. So we'll talk about how people do that. Then we've got app-based push notifications. That's, if you've got the Gmail app installed and then on your phone, you try to log into Gmail on your PC or your Mac, you get a push notification on your phone saying, hey, Guillaume, are you trying to log in from Canada right now? It's, 9:32 a.m. And then you say yes, and then you're logged in. So that's better. And then we have hardware security keys. You'll see me refer to YubiKeys quite a bit because that's what we use here, but there's standards for that, and there's other brands as well. So when I say SMS and voice is not secure, what I mean by that is there's many different attacks exposing this as being unsafe over and over and over again, right? So most of these screenshots are from 2022. So what happened was nobody was using two-factor authentication a few years ago, or like a very small percentage. But then it started becoming more and more common, not just in banks, but I think in like everything related to cryptocurrency, right? Cryptocurrency companies had a really big incentive for making sure people's accounts weren't broken into, because a bank can sometimes roll back a transaction, but if someone logs into your coin whatever of the day account and moves Bitcoin out to someone else, there's no undo button for that, right? So they were big adopters of two-factor authentication, and they pushed that forward. And the default option is pretty much always SMS. The reason why is because it's very easy to enroll people with that. You might already have a phone number for them. So that's like an easy way of going from nothing, no 2FA to some 2FA. But now that it's become standard, the attackers aren't just going to go, oh, I can't steal money anymore. That sucks. I guess I'll find a job, right? Like that's not how things work. They'll apply more effort. They didn't need to apply more effort before. Now they do, and so they do it. And so what happens is typically through social engineering, and I really want to stress that fact, like there are weaknesses with the actual phone networks, but that's not what's usually used to break into accounts with SMS two-factor, right? Like that would be if someone is setting up like a fake cellular antenna to sniff your codes and log in as you, right? Like that's a very high value target scenario. What really happens, I'll say like 99% of the time, just pull that out of my hat, but it might even be more than that, is people social engineer the phone companies into giving them your phone number, right? So if I know what Drew's phone number is, and I know he uses, for example, AT&T, right? Like I might go to the mall and be like, hey, my name's Drew. I might have some fake ID or not. And then I just pretend I lost my SIM card and I get a new SIM card with Drew's phone number. As soon as I do that, all the voice and text messages come to me, right? And so the attackers that don't apply too much effort to it will typically only social engineer the phone companies. Some of them will go as far as bribing employees in phone companies or attacking their computers, making them download malware so they can do it directly from the phone company's network. So they don't need to social engineer anyone. And there's not that much you can do against that, right? Best option is to not use SMS two-factor when you can use something better. But in many cases, like I'm in Canada, banks usually have no two-factor, or if they have two-factor, it's SMS. There's nothing better. And in those cases, there's really not that much you can do. One thing I do recommend is call up your phone company and ask them if they have additional security measures. Like a bunch of them, for example, have voice biometrics that can replace the security questions, right? So instead of just asking for like your mother's maiden name, they might do a voice print, which is slightly safer. But again, there are usually ways around that because they can't require the voice print 100% of the cases, right? Like what if you call and you have a cold and your voice doesn't match, right? Then ask them what the verification questions would be that they would ask. But really use that as little as you can. And if you had like a company account, for example, like I've done consulting for many years, right? So I've got like a company bank account where the money would go. And what I did for that one was I had a voice over IP setup with a phone number that I only use for the bank. It's not used anywhere else. So people wouldn't know to social engineer that. All right, so just avoid this whenever you can. Plus, then you won't have to deal with the code coming in like 58 seconds later and being valid for only 60 seconds. Then we talked about time-based one-time passwords, or TOTPs, right? So that's been used for a long time, decades, really. So some of you might remember RSA Secure ID, right? That little keychain on top. I don't know how many of you have had to use those, but they were identical in how they work to like the Google Authenticator app or Authy, which I'm showing in a screenshot at the bottom, which is you had a code, it was good for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And that was only based on time, right? So there's a clock in it, or if it's an app on your phone, there's obviously a clock on your phone. And so the server knows that at this time, the code you should be sending is whatever is being displayed right now. So there's a few problems with this. It's better than SMS, right? Because now there's no third-party company I can call and convince, right? Like I can't call up a phone company and say, I want Drew's secure ID. If Drew, you have a keychain like that in your pockets, I can't steal it from you. What I can do though, is if I'm trying to phish you, I can just ask you for the code, right? Like it's the same technique as phishing for a password. I'm just gonna ask you for the code. The main difference is I have to use it really quick, right? Like I need an automated setup where as soon as you're going to get phished, I'm gonna log into your account and then maintain that session for when I wanna use it to steal data or do whatever I wanna do. But as the stakes keep getting raised and security keeps getting improved, that is something that we see people doing. So essentially what they do is they set up kind of like, imagine a proxy between you and the real site where you want to go. They will ask for your credentials. They'll pass them through to the real website, right? So they know that it works, and they might even show you real information from the website you're trying to hit. So you won't even know you've been phished. But what happens is that web session is open not from your browser, but from their own computer. So it's just faster phishing. The other weakness with this is they're often stored on devices that can be compromised and also contain the passwords. So for example, if you're using a password manager that supports putting in your two-factor codes on a Mac or a PC, and you get malware on your Mac, that means someone could steal your passwords from your password manager when it's unlocked, but also the second factor is stored in the same place, right? So that's a lot better than SMS. It's infinitely better than no two-factor. But again, single machine getting compromised could put that at risk, and you're not protected from credential theft in phishing. So, but still a good step up. Then we've got push notification. And there are weaknesses to that too, right? So you've probably seen in the news the Lapsus group, like a bunch of mostly kids got arrested in the UK, and they hacked into NVIDIA, Microsoft, a dozen others since December. They're credited with kind of like inventing one technique, and it's not true. They didn't invent it, but they used it a lot. It's a technique that already existed before, but it's essentially, they will spam you with login notifications until you accidentally, or just because you think there was a bug and you wanted to stop, you're going to say, yes, I'm trying to log in, right? And an attacker could time that with the time of day, right? Like if they know what time zone you're in, oh, it's 8:30 a.m. They seem to work at 8:30 a.m. based on like their GitHub history or whatever. So I'm just going to try to log in like 100 times at 8:30 a.m. and hope that they hit yes on one of the login prompts, right? That's how that would be compromised. It's not as vulnerable to regular phishing, right? Because you need, like, the real website needs to send you a notification, but you could be spammed for it. In terms of user experience, it really requires your mobile device with data access to log in, right? So that nowadays is less of a problem, but it can be annoying sometimes. So this is a really good two-factor method. It's not the best. And what I would recommend if you're using this, especially if you're using this on a site that doesn't offer hardware security keys, is to turn off the notification for the Authenticator app. So some of these are standalone apps, right? Like Microsoft has the Microsoft Authenticator, for example, if you want to log into your Office 365. Google allows you to use the Gmail app for that. Turning off notifications to the Gmail app is kind of annoying, right? But you can also use the Google Search app on iPhone, for example. And so what I would recommend is you turn off the notifications completely. And then when you're trying to log in, open the app on your phone, log in, you'll get the prompt, you say yes, and then you close the app. That way, no one's going to be able to spam you with notifications when you're not trying to log in. But again, if it's an app like Gmail, for example, you probably won't want to turn off notifications completely for it. That being said, Gmail supports hardware security keys, so that's not much of a problem. So that's like the third best type of two-factor authentication.
Wait, so I have a question, Guillaume.
Yep.
How does that work? So they send the notification, and then you as a user are confirming.
Yeah, exactly. And they could send like 100 of them, for example, right? But the session is established on their side. They already have your password when they do this, usually, right? We've already established that passwords will be stolen, right? So even if you have 2FA, passwords are still going to be stolen as easily as before. It's just you can't use them directly.
Right.
Yeah. So what the Lapsus was doing was they were spamming people with two-factor credentials. And like one thing here, as like a startup that's remote and that's like cloud first, we're a young company, we don't have a lot of legacy. I think we see less. We see fewer errors related to authentication than people who work in enterprise, right? So if you work in enterprise and you've got like a VPN you got to connect to before you open Outlook that connects to your internal Exchange server, and then you you enter like 12 passwords, when you log in the morning, and then you might be used to having like weird things happen, right? Like, for example, in enterprise, people get TLS certificate validation errors all the time, and they just like blow through that because that's common, right? They have like self-signed certificates and what. So all of these things train people to just click yes on whatever prompt they get, because things don't work if they don't do that, right? And so attackers will take advantage of that by showing you 1,000 prompts, and you think there's a bug, right? Oh, there must be something caught in the background that's trying to log in. I'll just say yes, and it's going to log in, and then you do it, and it stops, right? So you don't even think anything suspicious happened. You just think that there was like a runaway process trying to log in. So that's the flow, right? Like in theory, if you never hit yes on that, that would be very safe. But in practice, it could even be like a timing issue, right? If I know exactly at what time you're going to log in, and I log in at the same time as you could click on the wrong one. So that's it's just because when you get the prompt, your phone getting the prompt doesn't really have context on like what you were doing on your other device, right? Like it's completely separate. And then we have hardware security keys, which were designed for this from the ground up, right? So you'll hear me call them like U2F keys. U2F stands for Universal Second Factor. And FIDO is Fast Identity Online. It's an industry alliance that has like browser manufacturers in it, operating system vendors, a bunch of other people who just hate passwords because they are terrible for many reasons. So FIDO was started to fight against passwords, right? Like, let's invent something better. And one of the things they created was the U2F standard. And so that's the standard. When we say hardware security keys, here at least, or when we say U2F, we mean hardware security keys that are standard and that support this authentication method. And the way they work is you have a key. Each key has its own serial number and is unique, right? Then whatever application or website you're trying to use, you register that key with them. And the reason it's not phishable is because if you've got the key in your laptop, right? So that's a key. First of all, you need to touch it when you log in, right? Like the key being connected to your laptop doesn't change anything really, right? But when you try to log in, you need to touch it. If you click the key and you're not on the real website, that's cryptographically protected. Well, first of all, your browser is going to tell you that a new website is trying to get access to your key. But even if you said yes, the website might, get a glance at what the serial number of your key is, which might not be great for privacy. But other than that, no one will be able to trick your key into letting them log into your Google account that way. So that makes them much, much, much safer against credential phishing, right? They are essentially not, phishing is still a problem. Social engineering is still a problem, even if you're using this, right? Someone can trick you into downloading malware on your laptop and then stealing your sessions through the laptop, but the key itself is safe from credential phishing. The only downside they really have is you need to have the key with you. And that's getting solved by making devices U2F keys, right? So if you're using a Chromebook, for example, many Chromebooks can be U2F keys. Usually it's where the fingerprint reader is, right? So you have to touch the fingerprint sensor when you log in. If you're using GitHub and Chrome, you can do that on a Mac as well, right? Like you'll configure your Mac as a security key, and then you touch your Touch ID, and then it'll log you into to GitHub. And there's also ways, for example, if you're using Google, to turn your iPhone or Android phone into a U2F key, a security key for Google. And so what I think is going to happen is in a few years, pretty much every device that we use is going to be a U2F key. And so we won't necessarily need to have extra hardware for that. That being said, in the computer itself, it's not just like an app that's running on the computer. There's like separate hardware for this, and it's protected at the hardware level. So malware could not just like click your fingerprint sensor. So questions that I get pretty often regarding hardware security keys. Can I use my phone as a security key? I just said like Google lets you do that, for example. It doesn't turn your phone into a U2F standard key. It'll work with Google accounts. And what it does is it uses Bluetooth instead of like a push notification to the Gmail app, right? So you'll have a dedicated app, and then over Bluetooth, your laptop is going to send a push notification to it. And so then the problem of someone spamming you with notifications is solved when you do that, because well, someone would need to be within Bluetooth range of you, right? So it's not 100% solved, but I think if you work from home in your basement like I do, it's solved enough for most cases. So you can do that here at Fleet. You need to download the app, which is called, and I should have put that on the slide. If you're on Android, I think it is built in. And if you're not on Android, if you're on iOS, it is called Google Smart Lock app, right? So you just download the Google Smart Lock, but that only works with Google accounts. Can I use my security keys with personal accounts, right? So if you have a company provided security keys, they're yours. Well, we will never ask for them back, right? So feel free to use them everywhere, including like your personal Facebook accounts, your GitHub account, which is yours, or anything else. We're not going to ask for them back. The reason for that is, if they're not worth that much money, there's no need for us to, get them back at any time. But also, the safer your personal accounts are, the safer we are as a company, because social engineering can take advantage of personal accounts, right? So your personal accounts might be targeted by someone trying to get into your personal email for whatever reason, to then launch some kind of advanced phishing attack. And it's just better for everyone. So please do so. Can I use security keys to log in from any device? So that's been the part that's been very annoying with security keys over the last few years, which was, oh, I've got a security key, but it's USB-A. Oh, I've got a USB key, but it's USB-C. It's been quite a mess, but it's getting much better. So what we recommend doing, like the model that is our standard here, and I'm going to have links on the next slide, is there's a YubiKey it's USB-C, so you can see that. I think by now every laptop that everyone has a USB-C port. If you've got an iPad Pro, it's got a USB-C port. It also has NFC, so that's near field communication. So if you're logging in from your phone and it's asking you for your second factor, what you do is you just put your key close to your phone and it'll log you in, right? So even though it's not Lightning, I can't plug it into my phone. That works. Or if you have an Android phone with USB-C, it'll work, right? So the only device that I can think of that wouldn't work with this key is like a non-pro iPad, right? Because it's not Lightning, and an iPad doesn't do NFC. I don't think that's a use case that's very common here, but there's a workaround where you can essentially put the key in a device on the same network and generate it. So if anyone has that issue where you've got a device that's not USB-C and not NFC, let me know. We can totally solve it by now. People are often concerned that they'll need to use the key like every time they want to check their email. That's not the case, right? So for example, if you install the Gmail app on your phone, you need to log into the Gmail app no more often than you would without two-factor, right? So you just tap your key, log in once, then the Gmail app is logged in on your phone and you're good. And then on your Mac or on your PC, the sessions won't expire faster or slower because you have two-factor authentication. But what I would say is it's much easier to just touch the key when you need to log in again than to like type in some 6-digit code or whatever. So it's less of from a user experience perspective, it's pretty good. Then are there other brands than YubiKeys? Yes, because U2F is it's a standard. So for example, Google sells, they call them Titan keys. They're U2F compatible, so it will work with all of that. One of the reasons we use YubiKeys here is because they ship to like 160 countries, which as a remote company, it's awesome for us, right? So that's why we go with that. But they also support way more than just U2F, right? So there's a lot of things we can do with YubiKeys, which we're probably going to talk in like a future Lunch and Learn, like when we sign our commits in GitHub with PGP keys, you can do that from a YubiKey. There's like a million things you can do with a YubiKey, which you can't do with a regular U2F key. So these are the questions we have most of the time. That's all documented in our handbook. Does anyone have questions about how to use these, problems, what they should do with different accounts, anything? All right, well, I think we...
I got one, Guillaume.
Yeah, go ahead.
For the third bullet on the last slide, are there, let's see, what was it?
Are there other
can I use security keys to log in from any device?
Yeah.
Are there security concerns with let's say you plug your YubiKey into your personal device and then you're accessing Google Drive from that device. Are there?
Well, so there's like two things, right? Like, is it a security issue to use the key in another device? No, not really. Like the key won't be compromised by your device, so that is fine. The second part of your question doesn't really relate to two-factor at all, right? Because once you're logged in, right? So, for example, like one thing we don't do at Fleet is let people synchronize files to their personal devices from Google Drive, right? With the local storage sync. Having two-factor or not would not make a difference there, right? Like we wouldn't say like, oh, because we've got two-factor, you can now do it, because the reality is if the device is compromised, the same data is at risk. But if you use the key for like everything in your life, you need to log into your Facebook account from somewhere else. There's like no issue with plugging in that key at all. Like it doesn't put your work accounts at risk because you plugged in the key. Even if the device was compromised, just plugging in the key is not an issue at all. But don't go logging in from like the hotel room lobby's computer because you've got two-factor, right? That's probably a really bad idea, even with two-factor. Yeah.
So if we think about the matrix, this is a separate square.
So
that's the device.
Exactly. So if we're talking about like the cyber defense matrix, the keys really protect the users, right? Like the key protects your user account, but it doesn't do much to protect your devices, right? Like it will protect your web application because now your user accounts are safer, but really what it's doing is protecting the user account. So yeah, actually, thanks for bringing back the cyber defense matrix. Nice segue into the previous one. Does anyone else have other questions? I put a link here to our handbook that's accessible to anyone out there. So our security lunch and learns are posted to YouTube. So if you're a community member watching this, you can drop into the Fleet channel on the OS Query Slack to discuss our security lunch and learns, or you can go check the Fleet handbook, which is public and has a lot of information, like detailed information about how to use security keys, but also how to secure things like Google Workspace or GitHub or macOS, and we keep adding more and more in there.